Hey there, Rob. Good to see you.
How you doing, Corey? Good to see you.
Yeah, really good, really good. So we got one conservative leadership race out of the way, but we're in the midst of another one. And boy, I mean, I've never seen anything like a bunch of candidates all allying themselves to, all jump on the policy of one of their competing candidates like that. And the main sticking point, I guess, is the Sovereignty Act.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit. It's interesting, to say the least. I think it's important to note that the vast majority of conservative supporters and conservative members support the Sovereignty Act, which is no small thing. I mean, this was a relatively unknown policy proposal. Frankly, it was completely unknown a year and a half ago. And even 3 months ago, I'd say a couple percent might have heard about it. So to get that level of buy-in from Albertans, not just the members of the party, but also conservative supporters, and to see so many other Albertans saying, look, I'd like to see what this is and learn a little bit more and see how it's used in the legislature, and so forth. It's actually quite remarkable. It's surprised even me. Probably the only one it didn't surprise was Danielle. But it's been amazing. And the problem the other campaigns have, or the challenge, is that they're essentially campaigning against a policy that their own supporters and members really like, and that puts them in a pretty awkward spot, to say the least. So anyway, we'll see how it goes, and ultimately members will decide, and they'll make the decision of whether we move forward with this.
Yeah, so I mean, and you're not speaking for Danielle Smith. You're with the Free Alberta strategy, but
I wanted to just note on that I am actually taking a leave of absence. I took a leave of absence at the beginning of the campaign from the Free Alberta strategy group to serve as Danielle's campaign chair.
So okay, well, that's fine too, because I still want to I mean, it's the same subject matter anyway, so I just want to always be clear on who's speaking in which ways. Anyways, so that Sovereignty Act, I mean, one of the main arguments we hear against it from the usual poli-sci professors, from other politicians, is that it's constitutionally impossible, that it's just throwing something out that won't work or can't work. Why do they feel that way?
You know what? I think sometimes, first of all, some of them are just against the concept of Alberta asserting its jurisdictional rights. They're just essentially, they're anti-Albertan. A lot of them, I would say, out east, but that's not the case in Alberta. There's a lot of pro-Alberta people that obviously there are some that aren't in favor of it. But I think what it really is that there is sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to something when you first hear it in the media, and it's spun in a certain way. And I think that as people take a look at the Sovereignty Act, I think we've seen this through the campaign, and I think you'll see it further down the line with the general population as well, is that there's nothing all that controversial about the Sovereignty Act. It basically is just going to say that, look, when Ottawa clearly violates our constitutional jurisdictions as a province, or is clearly violating the rights of Albertans, their charter rights and freedoms, that the legislature is going to be able to gather, and if they so choose, under authority of the Sovereignty Act, they're going to say, look, we're not going to allow that particular policy to be enforced here in Alberta because we believe it's constitutional. And then, we believe it's unconstitutional, what they're doing, what the feds are doing. And then, of course, if the feds disagree with that, well, then they can challenge us in court, and they can take us to court, and we can wrangle there. But right now it's reversed. The feds are constantly doing unconstitutional things and forcing us to do things in the province that we don't want to do. But instead of we say, okay, well, we're going to write letters, and the response to that is letters, and it's court challenges that take years, and sometimes by the time the court rules on it, it's already it's already down the creek, and there's nothing we can do about it. Why don't we flip that around a little bit and say, look, it's clearly unconstitutional, for example, well, there's a whole bunch of examples, but freezing bank accounts in the Emergencies Act, for example, of peaceful protesters. Why would we enforce that among our own people? Why would we do that? It makes no sense to me. Why would we allow illegal gun seizures in our province? Property rights are the purview of the province. They're not the purview of the federal government. And you can go down the line. C-69. The Court of Appeal of Alberta has already said that that's unconstitutional. That's that new environmental assessment agency, essentially, that the yes and no to all different projects that across the country. Well, if we want to build highways here that are more than 75 kilometers long, or we want to build a gravel pit here, or somebody wants to build a different oil and gas development, we don't need the feds to okay that. That is the development of natural resources. That is provincial jurisdiction. The feds can butt out. And if they have a problem with that, they can sue us in court. But we don't need to, especially when it's wholly within Alberta and not crossing provincial lines. We need to defend our jurisdiction and our sovereignty. And that's what the Sovereignty Act is meant to do.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of what I found, and what I like about the approach is it's taking the fight to them. We've always been playing defensive. We wait until they do something to us, and then we complain. By then, it's already done, and we're looking in hindsight. And I got a feeling that I guess some of the establishment people within the party, and even Premier Kenney himself, still doesn't seem to understand that it was all of the big talk and small action when it came to Ottawa over the last few years that are a lot of what led to his losing his leadership in the first place. Like, the members want to see something substantial, and they're not going to put up with more letters to Ottawa.
No, the time for that is past. I mean, we've been doing that same thing for decades, actually, not just years, but decades, under an NDP government, under PC governments, UCP. It's all the same. It's all the same. The result is the same. And that is that the feds don't take us seriously. They think that we're just that we're pushovers. And Albertans are reasonable people, and we want to be contributing members of this country in Confederation. We want to be positive in that. And I understand that. I really do. And I think that we can be a positive influence in unity in this country. But I don't think you can really have a functional relationship, whether that's a personal relationship, whether that's a relationship in business, or whether it's a political relationship, where there's not healthy respect. And we have been completely disrespected by Ottawa for decades because we won't stand up for ourselves. Quebec gets respect because they stand up for themselves. We don't. And if we start doing that, we're going to get results. It's not going to happen all at once. Not going to use the Sovereignty Act on every single federal piece of legislation you don't like. But if we draw a line in the sand on some of these very egregious examples of federal intrusion into provincial jurisdiction, over the next year or two, it'll just become evident to Ottawa that they better stay in their own lane, because if they don't, they're going to have a big fight on their hands.
Yeah, well, and some people have described it as something that would bring about secessionism or break things up. And I mean, speaking for myself, as a guy who's been pretty involved in pushing for full independence for a long time, things like this, if the Sovereignty Act works, it would actually reduce secessionism. It would say, look, we can fix things without having to separate from the country. We can stand up for ourselves and address these issues. I mean, it's sort of disingenuous to claim that this is a secessionist sort of move.
No, it's absurd. It's just the opposite of that. It's we do have to use the language sovereignty, because that's what really we're talking about here. We're talking about the provinces have sovereign authority over certain areas in the Constitution, and those sovereign areas of jurisdiction need to be respected for this country to work. And I actually think, and I know, I think Danielle's spoken extensively about this, that the way to unify this country is for not just Alberta to be asserting their sovereign authorities, not just Quebec to assert their sovereign authorities, which is what they do, and we're just essentially following their lead on it. It's for every province in this country to say, look, the federal government needs to get out of these areas. They're not doing a good job. They're violating our constitutional jurisdictions, and they're trying to impose one-size-fits-all approaches on every province across the country. And it's been an abject failure, from healthcare to daycare to everything that they get their tentacles into, frankly, that's provincial in nature. That's a provincial jurisdiction under the Constitution. So this idea that, Pierre Poilievre has been talking about, and I would say Maxime Bernier has been talking about, this idea of decentralization of government, of having the federal role decreased, having the tax pool of the federal government decreased, and then a corresponding increase by the provinces to make sure that they're handling their own money and their own systems in the way they see fit. That is, in my view, and I know in Danielle's view, is the way to actually unify this country, because the way we're doing it right now, we're on a path to break up, I think, in this country, if we don't start respecting the rights of our provinces under the Constitution.
Yeah, so going further, and as it kind of shows on the website, kind of in the past too. I mean, it's one thing to say that you have an act saying you won't enforce unconstitutional things, but some things have to be changed in order to refuse that enforcement, such as an Alberta Provincial Police Force, which wouldn't take part in, say, gun seizures, or I see, the Independent Banking Act, which could save people's accounts from being seized by a government, as we've seen, and the judicial independence. But those are all separate acts that would be almost kind of little separate battles on their own as well.
That's right, and to be clear, like some of the things proposed by the Free Alberta strategy, certainly some of those ideas have been adopted by several candidates on the campaign, leadership candidates, particularly Danielle, obviously, which is why I chose to support her. But several things have not, and that's the thing. I mean, the Free Alberta Initiative is a think tank, and we came up with some ideas that we think that would work. But to your point, Corey, yes, there are other pieces, and some of the pieces that Danielle's talked about are, and other candidates as well, are the need for a provincial police force, particular for rural enforcement. They wouldn't affect the Calgary City Police or the Edmonton City Police or any of the city police. Those are provincially overseen anyway. But the RCMP is not, and we have our own priorities here in Alberta, in rural Alberta in particular. We need our own provincial police force. She's talked about the need to collect our own taxes provincially. We've got to put that infrastructure in place. That's important to asserting our sovereignty. And then, of course, a pension plan. I mean, that just makes good financial sense. We're sending billions and billions of dollars more into that plan than we're getting back for our seniors. So not only is that asserting sovereignty, that just makes a ton of sense on a dollar and cents basis. So those three things in particular have been kind of adopted by several of the leadership candidates, particularly Danielle. And then that combined with the Sovereignty Act, in my view, is why so many Albertans are looking at that and saying, you know what, that's a strategy that could work. And I think that's why she's having success.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if this could inspire other provinces as well, I mean, this people don't seem to realize that, decentralizing power in an ironic way can bring us closer together, because then we aren't at each other's throats with other things. I love using Switzerland as an example. You got 4 official languages, you got 26 cantons, very decentralized government, a great deal of change. You can travel 50 kilometers and you're into a totally different governing zone, and you don't hear about independence movements in Switzerland. They're all happy in one large diverse group. And the way to do that is to get the central federal government out of the hair of the smaller groups.
Isn't it ironic too that you're absolutely right, and it's ironic because liberals and the woke, I would say the woke left establishment, they all talk about diversity. That's their favorite word: diversity, 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 and that's all fine and good. They're talking, we're a diverse country, multicultural. That's great. And then they kind of hypocritically turn around and say, but when it comes to control of the country, we can't have diversity. We can't possibly let Quebec, Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan run their childcare systems differently or their healthcare systems differently. We need a Canada Health Act, or we need a new federal daycare program that puts conditions on how we run our system here. It's just one thing after the other: education grants, social grants, everything. They have to get their tentacles into everything. So they're actually very much against diversity when it comes to how people run their lives. And that's, when you're talking about diversity, that's just as important. I mean, we need to respect, Alberta is not Prince Edward Island. Quebec is not BC. Like, we're very different peoples, different cultures, and that's what makes us a great nation. And I think if you really look at, the 25 to 30, 35% of people that in Alberta and also in other provinces that want to have their own independent nation, so to speak, I would say that the thing that drives them to that the most is how fed up they are with how Ottawa deals with their particular province. Isn't that interesting? Because it's not that they have anything against their fellow Canadians. It's not that they don't think BC's not beautiful, the Maritime's not beautiful, and the people there are great when you sit down and have a beer with them. It's none of that. It's always Ottawa. Ottawa is the number one driver of political instability between the provinces, and the most, I would say, the biggest driver of disunity in our country. And so I think that Alberta can lead the way with Quebec, frankly, in making sure that we understand that we are different. Let's embrace those differences, and let's let the provinces govern themselves as much as possible.
Yeah, well, and most of what's being asked are things that other provinces are already doing. I mean, it frustrates me when Alberta tries to assert these sorts of things, we get called extreme. When Quebec does it, then they get indulged. I mean, come on, guys. Let's move on from this double standard.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a double standard, and it's hypocritical in the extreme. And I am always amazed, especially by the individuals that choose to fearmonger on this and choose to say, "Oh, this is a pathway to separation." No, I'm sorry. Asserting your constitutional rights as a province, um, that's just called leadership and standing up for your people. It's putting Albertans first, as Danielle is always saying. That's to try to equate that with trying to break up the country, and that that these proposals are Looney Tunes. It just, what it shows is that there's a lot of people in the media and on the left that make knee-jerk decisions to things, probably because when they were sipping their latte with their buddy down at the coffee shop, they or looking at their Twitter feed, they decided that this was a bad idea without even taking a substantial look at it. And I think that Albertans, generally entrepreneurial people, business-friendly people, they're taking a look at this, and they've taken a look at it over the last 3 months, and more are going to take a look over the next 3 months. And I think they're going to quite soon come to the realization that this is actually a really good step in redefining our relationship into a healthy one with Ottawa.
Great. And now, since you are formally now with Danielle Smith's campaign, I want to turn a little bit before I let you go. One of the commenters' question, because this is where the campaign's kind of changed, and I'm really interested in that actually, is Cara Byrne-Clark said, what about dismantling AHS? And I'm not sure if that's what the campaign point was, but was Danielle's taking on at least AHS, which is a huge area. And again, it's really going to stir the hornet's nest, but it really needs to be done. Where's the campaign coming from on that?
Well, AHS, I think your viewers likely talking about the release that was sent out yesterday on AHS reform. And what Daniel's policy on that is just, let's back up. AHS completely failed us during the COVID situation and management that occurred. We needed more ICU capacity. They gave us less. They gave us a bunch of, while they were bonusing their executives, we were having trouble recruiting people to help on the front line, and actually losing people because of their insane policy of firing healthcare workers that didn't agree with them on getting a vaccine, and then taking those individuals and firing them during a pandemic and during a situation where we needed to make sure that we had additional health support and health workers there. It was an absolute, it was crazy. That's the way to say it. Their management was completely dysfunctional. So the first thing that needs to happen is that Danielle has proposed is, look, we need a new AHS CEO. The other one's been let go. Let's make sure we bring someone in with executive experience, who's a healthcare reformer, who is going to get to the bottom of some of the problems in EMS response times, and obviously on the acute care shortage and these types of issues that we've been having. The board needs to be replaced with an interim commissioner that works with the CEO. That interim commissioner would report directly to the Minister of Health and the Premier. And we want a 30-day action plan to give us immediate steps that we can take to staff up and beef up our ICU and hospital bed capacity, so we don't have people on the ground sleeping and being treated on hospital floors as we flow into acute respiratory season here in the fall. And then a 90-day plan on how we're going to permanently decentralize healthcare to the local level, get local professionals and local decision makers involved in the process at the local level, get rid of this ridiculous level of middle management that is just afraid to make good decisions and is butt covering and communications and PR consultants. And that's just garbage. Let's return healthcare to the local level. Let's do it in a thoughtful, business-like fashion. So you don't just rip apart something overnight. But it does need substantial reform. And there are some things that do make sense for the province to handle as a province. But most healthcare delivery, that should be at the very local level and not by some big bureaucracy, because it has failed. It has utterly failed. It needs to be changed and reformed.
Well, I'm glad to see the discussion opened up, and well, the campaign's getting into its final legs. Probably, what, about half of the members have cast their ballot by now, who are eligible. Not too many undecideds left out there, but still, I mean, you work right to the very end. So, thank you very much for coming on to talk and break that down a little more for us today, because there's just so much different discussion and interpretation on a policy that hasn't even actually been drafted into legislation yet. So,
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yes, no, thank you, Corey. And I've noted that we've heard of all kinds of great ideas. A campaign should be about ideas. I've never heard of anyone ever requesting that Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre or any of the other candidates running in this race draft their legislation in advance. Of course, that's silly. We'll make sure, Danielle's said time and again, it'll be constitutional, it'll be thoughtful, and it'll be used as a tool strategically to take on Ottawa when they egregiously violate our constitutional position or constitutional rights. And looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing how that rolls out.
Right on. Okay. Well, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure. I'll let you get back to work. You guys have got a lot to do before the end of this.
Thanks, Corey. Take care.